we will talk about wastewater just quickly starting off. On the left of your screen, you see the traditional seasonally flushed outhouse where you might just go into the outhouse. Your pile would grow through the off season. They turn the irrigation ditches on, and down the road it goes. Luckily, we don't see those very often. The house on the right is a picture. I mean, this is dated 2004, so take it for what you will. But we don't really know where the wastewater from this house goes. And so it takes a little bit more research to figure out whether it's an on-site septic system, connection to a local community public system, or to a municipality. And so that's kind of the progression that has gone on in the last, I'd say, 60 or so years, maybe even longer. So wastewater treatment, this is just a basic slide that talks about, sort of the house in the middle of the screen there, and then you flush your toilet and everything goes to that septic tank where the solids go to the bottom, the scum floats to the top, and the middle is the effluent that goes out into a drain field, which then some evaporation, although that's pretty minimal in Montana, some root uptake. But most of the time, these trenches are about 3 feet deep. So there's not a ton of evaporation and only seasonal root uptake. And then it percolates to the groundwater table, which in theory would head away from your well, but oftentimes that's not the case. Montana didn't promulgate the Water Quality Act until 1993. So regulatory authorities are precluded from assessing any pollution from drain fields that were installed legally or otherwise prior to 1993. Here's a good illustration of what that pollution might look like. So we don't do wells in houses anymore, thankfully, although we still do see them, but you can see the water supply goes into the house, septic tank, drain field percolates, and then you see this sort of gray cloud in the groundwater, which is what we call a mixing zone. And that mixing zone of pollution goes along the direction of groundwater flow until it surface expresses into a pond or stream, or mixes enough into the groundwater that it is no longer significant is the appropriate term. And I think we've all heard the solution to pollution is dilution, which isn't exactly correct. So here's a picture of an existing current septic system. This will come into play a little bit when we talk about House Bill 658 at the end. But in 2001, Gallatin County adopted more stringent local regulations requiring pressure distribution for systems to equally spread out the effluent across the length of those trenches that you see in the ground there. So you see tank, dose tank is the third tank, and then to the drain field. This is sort of what I like to call maybe deal killers for septic permits, which is going to be floodplain and groundwater. The top left is going to show you where we have less than 10 feet is the light teal. So you can see a significant part of the county has shallow groundwater. That also is where a ton of the irrigation ditches are in the valley. So that can load the groundwater table more significantly than if we didn't have that recharge. And then we have depth greater than 10 feet. Anywhere it's less than 10 feet is cause for concern for septic systems because there's that shallower distance to groundwater. On the top right is a scaled site plan that shows these are actually Castle Rock tracks. If you're headed down towards past Gateway into the mouth of the canyon there's sort of that low-lying development on the left if you're headed south. And this is the Gallatin River here. You can see we have well isolation zones, and then you can see these zones of pollution that are headed straight towards the Gallatin River. And they have to meet state standards before the end of that zone of pollution, but that state standard is 5 milligrams per liter. And so you're hoping that by the time it hits the river, it is much more diluted, although once it's in groundwater, dilution is the only thing that's really happening. There's not a whole lot of treatment. And then the bottom is a local trailer court that was exhibiting some flooding, which is on a septic system. So this is why we don't issue septic permits in floodplains for the most part. Here's another diagram of how a site plan might get really complicated and the things that we look at. So we're looking at the 100-foot well isolation zone circle. Here they're just drawn as partial circles just to demonstrate those setbacks are met. And you have a small 3-bedroom home with a tank and a drain field. And then they do have to have a replacement area. So every system in Montana is required to have 100% septic replacement area. I think during the symposium, I talked about how primary drain fields or drain fields in general are kind of like a big diaper in the ground. And eventually you have to change it because they get saturated. So if you have toddlers, you know exactly what that looks like. So the other trick here and what we're working towards with the Gallatin County growth policy and the flume, thanks to Megan's work and others in the planning office, is talking about the cost of connecting existing septic systems to sewer. On the left, in order to connect this to a regional sewer system, you'd have to run a main down each one of these streets. Which is quite a bit. I did the math before my presentation and I can't remember what it is, but it's about double the amount of piping that would be required to go down this main loop of Haystack Drive, and approximately the same number of lots to switch one from another. And we achieved the picture on the right by doing clustered development, where we have sort of all the houses kind of together in one portion of a tract, and then the large remainder left is open space. And that's what the county is moving towards, in addition to the local health code updates. So health code updates are there's a lot of updates, but mostly regarding the nutrient reduction strategy for watersheds which contain or drain to an impaired waterway, which is impaired for nitrate. So what does that look like? Well, here's all the impaired stream stretches, but the main stem of the West Gallatin is just impaired for hydrologic modification. So all the irrigation takeoffs, and is not been formally impaired for nitrates. So that is this sort of main stretch right here. And then you can see these clouds of elevated groundwater nitrate, where we're already seeing nitrate impacts in groundwater. And we see those over unsewered developments, which I'll show in just a second. I'm actually going to back up one slide. Oh no. See, I'm driving again. Yep. Sorry guys. It's my first day. Okay. So you can see this plume here south of Bozeman. What's interesting is that you can think about how the East Gallatin and all the headwaters sort of come together, and that's roughly the direction of groundwater flow. So this plume is headed this way. And the city of Bozeman's wastewater discharge is over here. So as we see these plumes migrate, we're going to see the city of Bozeman and subsequently Belgrade and subsequently Manhattan having to treat their discharges to a higher standard. City of Bozeman has a surface water discharge permit, where Belgrade has a groundwater discharge permit, and there are different parameters for the treatment styles that both need. The difference is that Belgrade needs more surface area of land to discharge, where Bozeman is a point source in terms of the discharge to the surface water itself, but their headworks and their pre-treatment has to take into account, it can happen in a smaller footprint, but those are way more expensive to put into place. And so as we see these contamination events spread and become more dense, those communities are going to pass that cost on to their ratepayers. And that's really important distinction for why everyone should care about wastewater, even if you live in a city. So here's an example of how the health code is going to impact cities. This is probably the most concentrated area of growth, where we're going to see the need for these advanced treatment technologies. So Middle Creek or Highlight Creek is impaired for nutrients. And this is the eastern side of Four Corners. Is right.
I just have a couple of checks I want to drop off.
We have a lot of
there we go.
unsewered development happening, and we'll continue to see that. And so the hope is by having those treatment sources reduce their nitrate, that will reduce the load we're adding to Middle Creek, or at least keep it the same while we're increasing density for housing units. What is an advanced treatment system? Well, they are sort of, if you can think about a motorcycle sidecar, maybe as a good analogy to the septic tank. We have things like the top one here is a tightly folded filter fabric, where it takes the effluent through a dough system, sprays it over this media with an active air intake. So you're getting that aerobic change, and then it sends it back to the tank to complete the conversion of ammonia to really N2 is what you're trying to get to off gas that nitrate rather than nitrate into the groundwater. And so just by using this addition to an already existing component, you're seeing a 50% reduction. There's other styles which actively have an air intake in a separate component, and it does kick it back to the septic tank for that reduction. The one on the bottom right uses these sort of baked potato looking foam rocks that are covered with sand as their media. And then on the bottom left is what we what do I want to say? A treatment technology out of Butte that is approved. It's a kind of a mini batch reactor, and it is approved to discharge at 7.5 milligrams per liter. So another significant reduction from that initial strength of 50 milligrams per liter of residential effluent. So here's what that cycle looks like for all of you organic chemists. But essentially, we have the ammonification, which happens in a standard septic tank. And then there's nitrification, which is a partially aerobic process, which then discharges to soil. And I put partially aerobic here also because we're only getting that reduction anything from the drain field to groundwater in the vadose zone, which is pretty shallow here in Montana, specifically because of our climate and also the big gravelly soil that we see. So we don't get a ton of reduction past the drain field before it gets into the groundwater. And that's the orange boxes. So that's a standard system, which is reflected in the picture on the bottom left. If we add the additional treatment, which that's really not a question mark, that should be just additional treatment, we get this anaerobic to aerobic nitrate fixing cycle really kicking up. And then we're actually starting at 24 milligrams per liter nitrate plus nitrite effluent, which then gets all the same reduction in the soil treatment that a standard would. We're just starting with half power nitrate. So we get to use that same percentage following that 24, which is wonderful and a good start. There are some areas of the counties which are required to use that more advanced treatment that discharges to an even cleaner state of effluent based on their incoming background groundwater levels. So we are in the middle of the health code revision. As Lily said, the second reading is going forward this week, which is Thursday, March 27th at 9 a.m. in the third floor community room at the Gallatin County Courthouse. You can also register online to watch, listen, or comment via Zoom during the meeting. And if you can get public comment in writing, we also accept that via email at boh@gallatin.mt.gov. And I can actually throw that into the chat when we're done here. We'd love to hear from any and all of you, whatever opinion you may have. We haven't had a ton of interest. We've had a couple of engineering firms show up with great comments. And it would just be great to see some more engagement. Okay, so I'm going to just stop there. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to take just a quick second to talk about how House Bill 658, which we see proposed right now, where it's at and what that also could potentially mean for these revisions. So House Bill 658 is being proposed by a local legislator out of Belgrade. It did pass the House on a party line vote. And what's really concerning from my perspective about this particular bill is that it would remove the ability for any county to promulgate their own more stringent regulations, which would mean this proposed nutrient reduction strategy would go away. And it would also roll back our 2001 regulation that we added in 2001 to require pressure distribution in really fast soil. So think river rock, gravel, Belgrade. And so that would not only sort of change the path we're headed now, but also roll back those 20 years of protections. It is scheduled for a hearing on April 2nd in front of Senate Local Government Committee at 3 p.m. If you haven't been up there before, reach out. I can tell you how to get to that room. It's kind of complicated navigation wise. We will be there along with several other counties and other agencies. And I would say that we tried during the House hearing to relay the science, but you only have 2 minutes to testify in front of those committees. So getting across this level of science in 2 minutes at sort of a level that folks that don't deal with wastewater or water really can understand is difficult. So I will just leave that there. If folks have questions about what they can do, they can reach out to us or anybody else in water quality, but it would be great to have some other folks show up and share whatever opinions that they may have. So with that, hopefully I didn't gloss over anything too much. I am here for questions.